Any financial advisor will tell you dipping into your 401k account is a bad idea. It'll shrink your retirement savings and you'll lose a large portion of that money to fees and taxes.
But if you've run through all other options, raiding your 401k is possible as a last resort. We want to stress that. Let's bring in Yahoo finance reporter Melody Hahm. She is here to break this all down. All right, so as a last resort, if you really got your back to the wall, explain how taxes and penalties, what kind of taxes and penalties would be imposed for cashing out that 401k.
Well, after you hear what I have to say, you will reaffirm that it is a last resort. Keep in mind that the whole point of 401ks and the whole advantage is that it's tax deferred and it's pre-tax contributions. So you will be jeopardizing that entirely if you tap into it early. You are responsible for 20% federal and state tax penalties, as well as a 10% early withdrawal fee. And that means if you're younger than 59 and a half years old, which is all of us here.
Right.
So, I mean, blaring signs right there, you are going to be penalized greatly for dipping in early on.
You know, I know sometimes people find themselves underwater. They've got credit card bills. They're, they feel like they're drowning, and they look at this nest egg and they say, "Oh, if I take $5,000 out, is it ever advisable to take money out of your 401k to pay down debt?"
Yeah, and there are certain circumstances where you will sort of be given a leeway cause, and that's if you're a first-time home buyer and you need to apply for a mortgage. If you are actually in foreclosure mode or being evicted, that's something that you can really tap into. But again, it is all person by person, so you can't just make a sweeping generalization and say, okay, this is all a go. Talk to your financial advisor, make sure you get loans from friends and family, maybe even look at a home equity loan or a credit line in order to see if there are other options out there, because a lot of times people feel like, okay, I have $50,000 saved up in here, that's the best bet, but later down the road you're going to suffer.
And rarely do people ever put it back. I mean, because if you needed it in the first place, it's rare that you're going to be able to find the money to replace it. But are there differences and are there rules for simply just borrowing money from your 401k?
Yes, 100%. So there are 401k loans, and that is very different from actually withdrawing money from your 401k, and that is a much lower penalty, and state and federal taxes can be much lower, and that depends on which state you're living in, and it's not across the board such a steep penalty.
What about when you switch jobs? I know people get tempted to dip in when they switch jobs. What should you do with your 401k?
So your future employer or your next employer should hopefully have a 401k plan as well, so you can just roll it over to a new one. Or if you are more into like the day traders or people who are a bit more risky, they love Roth IRAs, because you can actually pick stocks rather than just invest in simple mutual funds. So for those who have an appetite for risk, Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs are much better. And the best thing about Roth IRAs is that your contributions are not taxed. So that's great for people who do want to take the money that they've contributed later down the road. But keep in mind, earnings can be taxed.
You know, I think one of the difficulties is that generally people don't understand how beneficial the 401ks will be for them afterwards, especially the money that they may have accumulated, which may not seem a lot, especially when you're younger. But when you talk about compounding interest, when you talk about that money growing tax-free, tax-deferred, it's just, people need to understand. I think there's a lot of financial education missing for people to understand exactly what it's going to mean when it's time for retirement.
Yeah, and I think you were mentioning when people are overwhelmed with debt, even student loan debt, it's the go-to is, okay, but I have this lump sum sitting here, and I do think that based on your circumstances, it might be an okay option, but keep in mind, especially with student loans, there are income-based repayment plans that you can tap into, and that can make it so it's less daunting. The amount that you pay each month is actually a lot lower than the average. And with 401ks, you can readjust how much you're contributing. You don't need to max out. If your employer is matching, fine, that's great earlier on for you to give 10% of your income, but if that seems too much, do 1%, do 2%, start low. Yeah.
It's free money that you're getting if you have an employer that matches, and when you take it out, you're kind of just stealing from yourself, your future self, you know?
I think also what's important to point out, especially for younger people, is that they may look and they may see student debt that they have. They may have credit card debt that they've accumulated as students, and there's always other options working with those credit card companies. That's probably a conversation for another day, but working with the credit card companies, working with the student loan provider to figure out a way to make the payments easier as opposed to rating something that's going to be helpful to you when you're much older.
Definitely. Melody Hahm, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Brought to you by Bright House Financial, established by MetLife.